Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So after Farage named Robert Jenrick as his preferred choice to run the UK economy, Honest Bob was setting out some economic policies yesterday, which seemed to be in stark contrast to those Farage has promised for years. Now, this was always going to happen at some point. Nigel Farage is attempting to cobble together a coalition of incompatible voters, in the same way Boris Johnson attempted after the 2019 general election. Johnson tried to maintain left-wing voters who voted for him in the Red Wall with the more traditional Conservative voters who habitually vote for the Tories in the Blue Wall. It's never going to work. The Red Wall voters wanted better public services and a stronger social safety net. They weren't bothered about taxes being needed to pay for it. The Blue Wall voters lived in affluent areas, so were already happy with their local amenities, and didn't want to pay more taxes for northern monkeys. And as soon as the unifying effects of Brexit and Corbyn were out of the picture, the coalition rapidly collapsed because it was impossible to keep both sides happy. And Johnson refused to choose. Interestingly, what he actually did was piss both off. He raised taxes, but he didn't use the money to pay taxes being needed to pay for it. The Blue Wall voters lived in affluent areas, so were already happy with their local amenities, and didn't want to pay more taxes for northern monkeys. And as soon as the unifying effects of Brexit and Corbyn were out of the picture, the coalition rapidly collapsed because it was impossible to keep both sides happy. And Johnson refused to choose. Interestingly, what he actually did was piss both off. He raised taxes, but he didn't use the money to boost the social safety net, just let his mates trouser the cash. So the Blue Wall got higher taxes, as well as shit in their rivers, and the Red Wall got a lower standard of living. Political genius, that is. Well, Farage is attempting to cobble the same coalition, united by common dissatisfaction with the latest Labour leader. But Farage doesn't have a cunning plan to manage it. The politics is still the same. The left-wing voters want better public services and for richer areas to pay for it. And the right-wing want to sod that and have lower taxes. And as soon as Reform UK have to firm up policies, it will split those voters. Now, maybe Farage is more comfortable with doing this now because he thinks Labour are simply too unpopular to win. But what if that's not the case so much in a year or two, possibly after a change of leader? So how is Robert Jenrick dismantling this coalition that Farage has desperately tried to keep together? Well, his vision is one of cutting waste, lowering taxes, restoring stability. All sounds brilliant. But in a massive U-turn, Jenrick has confirmed Reform will now restore the two-child benefit cap, a policy the party previously promised to abolish. He calls Britain's benefit system an economic and moral disaster, promised to defuse the benefits bomb set to bankrupt Britain, so he says. This is a direct reversal. It's a move that plants a flag for fiscal conservatism right in the middle of Farage's populist playground. And consider it's not just the policies which might fracture the coalition, but the personality. Jenrick's not a political outsider. He's a product of the Westminster establishment, a former cabinet minister under Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, secretary to the Treasury under Theresa May. Jenrick's career has been built inside the very system Reform UK claims it wants to destroy. His appointment as the so-called shadow chancellor, well, it's not really shadow chancellor, was a deliberate move by Nigel Farage to counter accusations.
What is the shadow government? That's just the minority government, right? Do they actually do anything? Like, do they have real positions in government, or
that the party is just a one-man band? It's an attempt to signal that Reform is ready for government. However, Jenrick's arrival is not without internal friction. The role of Treasury spokesperson, which is what the role really is, was apparently hotly contested, with the party's deputy leader, Richard Tice, being moved to business and energy instead. Jenrick's first big outing was a pitch to the City of London. He promised that the Bank of England would remain independent and that the Office for Budgetary Responsibility, the OBR, would be reformed but not abolished. Now, even talk of reforming the OBR, I'm going to say, will spook investors if they think Reform are close to power, so I don't expect firm policies on that one. I suspect Jenrick talked about reforming the OBR only because Farage previously had a policy of scrapping it altogether, and Jenrick probably doesn't want to be seen to be reversing literally every single Farage economic policy. I mean, imagine how this looks to the grassroots Reform supporters. Farage has spent years attacking the Tories and Jenrick personally for their failures. Farage announces loads of nice, simple-sounding populist policies. Then the arch-Tory Robert Jenrick comes in and calmly says all of Farage's economic policies are wrong and Reform UK are going to adopt Tory economic policies from now on. Because this is now, if this carries on, this is what's going to happen in the next election. This actually helps Labour distinguish themselves from Reform UK because their economic policies will be very, very different. But Reform UK's economic policies, you won't be able to put a Rizzler paper between them and the Tory economic policies. Jenrick spoke of restoring stability, making sure the party's plans are fully costed. That is the language of a traditional chancellor, designed to soothe the nerves of investors. It's the language of fiscal responsibility and choices, difficult choices. It is in almost every way the opposite of the language that has defined Nigel Farage's entire political career. Nigel Farage is a master of populist politics. His success has never been about details. He says we should have this, doesn't say how we should have it. He says we shouldn't have this, doesn't say what you replace it with. He doesn't have costed policy documents. It's all about channeling a feeling. That's what populism is. For years, he has cultivated an image as the voice of the people against the elite.
I will say this, I never hear Farage talk about details for anything either. He comes across as like a standard populist retard to me. But I mean, so does Constantine, so. But maybe I'm just not hearing him in speeches or debates where he's actually talking about any concrete numbers for anything.
Promising simple solutions to complex problems. His appeal is built on bold promises that resonate with a deeply felt sense of loss and betrayal. The Farage doctrine is less about economic theory and more about political instinct. It's about identifying a grievance and offering a radical, usually expensive solution. But just how are you going to pay for it? Oh, we'll get rid of waste. For example, past reform pledges have included massive tax cuts, such as raising the income tax personal allowance to £20,000, a move that would cost the Treasury tens of billions a year. They promised to scrap VAT on energy bills and slash fuel duty, policies designed to appeal to voters struggling with the cost of living. But under scrutiny, Farage then had to soften these pledges, admitting that a £20,000 threshold is now an aspiration. And that's how he attempted to win different groups over. To the Red Wall, he promises to do all the things they want. To the Blue Wall, he says, but we won't do any of it until the economy allows. That is the core of the Farage doctrine. Make the big attractive promise first, worry about the details and the cost later. It's a strategy that has built a powerful electoral movement, but it's one that sits in direct opposition to the fiscal details Jenrick has been bringing to the table yesterday. Which brings us to this central conflict. Robert Jenrick's job is to take Farage's populist appeal and make it economically credible. But how do you promise fiscal discipline whilst also championing policies that, according to independent analysis, just don't add up? The Institute for Fiscal Studies, for example, they've said the package of tax cuts proposed by reform would in reality cost tens of billions of pounds a year more than stated, while its spending reductions would save far less. This is because government departments are not awash with waste. This is the tightrope Jenrick must now walk, and we're already seeing the first and most
Oh God, wait, what? Did he do the meme?
incredible. But how do you promise fiscal discipline whilst also championing policies that, according to independent analysis, just don't add up? The Institute for Fiscal Studies, for example, they've said the package of tax cuts proposed by reform would in reality cost tens of billions of pounds a year more than stated, while its spending reductions would save far less. This is because government departments are not awash with waste. This is the tightrope Jenrick must now walk, and we're already seeing the first and most significant sign of him.
Does Farage do that meme that there's a bunch of government fraud and waste and we're going to find it and that's where we're going to get hundreds of billions of pounds from or whatever?
Pulling the party back towards its own real ideology. It's a rebranded Tory party. The decision to reverse course and now support a two-child benefit cap is a landmark moment, and it'll be the first of many. Previously, Farage said the party would scrap the limit. Then he said, well, we'll scrap it for British parents. You know, we have to get a bit of racism in. But Jenrick's overruled even that. In his first speech yesterday, he stated unequivocally,
They're trying to copy Doge bar for bar. That's a thing that predates Doge by probably centuries, but at least decades. Anytime you hear somebody make big promises about spending or savings related to waste or fraud or just government inefficiencies, it's always a fucking lie. It is always it's always been a lie, and it will always be a lie. It's always a fucking lie. It's the biggest cope. It's like the magical, like wasteful spending is the magical purse that you can draw from if you need to make up any bullshit for anything ever. Like, oh, you have $1,000 and you want to buy something that's $100,000. How are you going to do it? Oh, don't worry. There's a lot of waste and I'm going to quadruple or 10x or whatever. They always dramatically overshoot. It's so fucking stupid. I don't know how people in the US still fucking fall for it. I guess people in Britain are falling for it too.
like, we want to help working families have more children, but we just can't afford to do it with welfare. So it has to go. This isn't a minor policy tweak. It's a fundamental statement of intent. There will be more policies like it to come. It says that in the battle between populist promises and fiscal conservatism, Jenrick is going to make sure that conservatism will win out. He's directly challenging the Farage doctrine of promising everything to everyone. He's basically promising nothing to anyone, apart from the rich. He is, in effect, reversing the populist direction of the party on a key welfare issue, arguing that the country can't afford Farage's generosity. And this is the first major battle in the war for reform's economic pitch. And Jenrick has just fired the opening shot. The danger for reform is that this internal policy war shatters the coalition of voters it's built. The party's support is not a monolith. It's a complex and potentially contradictory mix of different groups. You've got the traditional older ex-conservative voters concerned with immigration, drawn to promises of lower taxes and a smaller state, the world Robert Jenrick is quite happy to give them. But on the other hand, reform has made significant inroads with ones who might in the past have traditionally voted Labour, working class communities. A recent study shows reform supporters who switched from Labour are strongly in favour of wealth redistribution. 2/3 of the group believe the government should redistribute income from the better off to the less well off. That puts them in direct opposition to the 23% of conservative to reform switchers who believe the same. That is the electoral trap. How do you appeal to both? How can Robert Jenrick sell a message of welfare cuts like restoring the two-child benefit cap to ex-Labour voters who rely more on the social safety net? And how can Nigel Farage continue to make big spending promises to win over those red wall seats when his own economic spokesperson is publicly stating the country can't afford them? Because I'll tell you something, those red wall voters, if they get that message, they're going to think, hang on a minute, you say we can't afford them? We can afford to tax richer people though, can't we? Can we do that? That's what they think. This voter base is acutely divided on key policy areas. The party's trying to be all things to all people. Jenrick's appointment means Reform UK and now working on detailed policies. Well, Reform UK having detailed policies is a bit like Superman wearing a kryptonite pendant. Just like Boris Johnson, the man Farage lambasts on the daily, Nigel Farage is trying to cobble together an impossible coalition, which is only made even feasible by the unpopularity of the Labour leader. He's attempting the same trick in the same way. Johnson at least won an election before he got caught out. Will Farage? Or will a combination of Labour changing their leader and approach, along with Robert Jenrick, expose the fault lines in this new approach for Reform UK? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel for more content. Click the bell notification icon so you know when new videos are out. Thanks for watching and until next time. I'll see you later.
Okay. Britain needs reform and Reform UK needs you. Brexit has so much potential. Our country is full of talent and energy. Brexit is the opportunity of a lifetime. Record mass immigration has damaged our country. The small boat crisis threatens our security. Multiculturalism has imported separate communities that reject our way of life. Divisive woke ideology has captured our public institutions. Transgender indoctrination is causing irreversible harm to children. Does Constantine say that this is not a far-right party? Or does he just not like the term far-right? He would just call it a right-wing party? He just thinks these are normal views? I guess the question is, Margaret, I can't spell this fucking name. Thatcher. I should do the Thatcherism fucking meme. What were her views on like immigration? Immigration. The leaders rivers of blood speech when we strongly criticized Commonwealth immigration to the UK. She agreed with it. Thatcher believed that the National Front was winning over large numbers of conservative voters. She criticized Labor's immigration policy to attract voters. What is the if I were to look for their like position on immigration from 79 to 90. The unprecedented population explosion has pushed Britain to a breaking point. There's a housing crisis, a benefits crisis, record crime, record NHS waiting list, wages are stagnating, net zero has sent energy costs soaring, it is making us poorer and colder, damaging British industry and forcing drivers off the road. The Tories have broken Britain. Labour will bankrupt Britain. A vote for either is a vote for more incompetence, dishonesty, and defeat. The two-party system has failed. We are ruled by an out-of-touch political class who have turned their backs on our country. Imagine smart immigration, not mass immigration. Wait, hold on. Is there a difference between a migrant and an immigrant? Or are these words just used interchangeably? Like, oh, he's a migrant. Oh, he's an immigrant. This is migration. This is immigration. Is there like a formal distinction, or is it just... Yes, but I won't tell you. Okay. No more small boats. No NHS waiting lists. Where are they going to get the money for it? Cut back office waste. Oh, okay. Lift the income tax starting threshold to £20,000 to save the lowest paid £1,500 per year. This takes 7 million of the least well-off out of the income tax to make work pay and get people off benefits. Ooh, I wonder how much. Lift the income tax starting threshold to £20,000. How much would that cost in terms of income? That sounds like it would cost a fuck ton, no? To save the lowest paid 15. Let's take 7 million off the least. 7 million of the least well-off. Income tax to make work pay and get people off benefits. I wonder what the benefits, how that works or whatever. Unlock Britain's vast oil and gas reserves to beat the cost of living crisis. How much, what gas and oil reserves does Great Britain have, or the UK have? Is it enough to like do everything in the country? Is there like easily accessible oil that they just don't do anything with? Okay, lots of stuff on immigration. Government spending needs major reform. Bank of England must stop paying interest to commercial banks on QE, quantitative easing reserves. This approach would save around £35 billion per year. Jesus. Must stop paying interest to commercial banks on QE reserves. If it's that much money, that sounds like it would be a really big policy. Have people actually spoken about this? Is this a good idea? It's weird that Constantine brings up Thatcher so much, given she was the one closing the coal mines, which goes against his anti-net zero opinions. Save £5 in every £100. Every department must slash wasteful spending. Cut bureaucracy. Improve efficiency. Okay, bullshit. Brexit bonus. Cut NSA regulations. Okay, bullshit. Cut foreign aid by 50%. Okay, save £6 billion from the £12.8 billion budget. Collect billions in unpaid tax. HM Revenue and Customs failed to collect tens of billions in taxes last year due to understaffing and bad management. Cut energy taxes. Cut residential stamp duty. Abolish the VAT tourist tax. The government has cost our economy over £10 billion when they stopped the VAT refund scheme for tourist shopping. This also deterred up to 2 million tourists. Wait, do people really not go to the UK because of the VAT? Is that a thing that happens? Or maybe from other European countries, although I don't know how hard it is to go there now. And then abolishing the inheritance tax for all estates under £2 million. Lift the minimum profit threshold to £100,000. Reduce the main corporate tax rate from 25% to 20%, then to 15%. Lift the VAT. Okay, Jesus. Where are they going to get all the money for the NHS? I don't understand. I feel like a lot of this is cutting huge amounts. The only thing is this would save a lot of money. I just don't know how realistic this is. This is a huge figure. This is a huge line item. £35 billion per year. Although I don't think that's enough to offset everything down here. Fuck me. Reform UK said its plan to stop the Bank of England from paying interest to commercial banks would hold quantitative easing reserves, would save around £35 billion per year, and has been endorsed by a series of high-profile people and groups. The party's plan, released on Monday, June 17th, said the Bank of England must stop paying interest to commercial banks on key reserves. He purchased around $35 The New Economics Foundation has spoken in favor of changes that could reduce the amount that the Bank of England pays to commercial banks. The IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, has also said there are arguments in favor of a change. However, neither believes that it could save the government £35 billion a year. Well, how much? Commercial banks are paid interest on the money they hold with the Bank of England. That includes the money from the quantitative easing that the bank embarked on in the wake of the financial crisis of 2008. The bank currently pays 5.25% on these deposits. That is the same as the official base interest rate. As of June 12, 2024, the bank held around £697.6 billion in its asset purchase facility. Reform's document did not explain its calculations, but it has likely arrived at its figure by taking 5.25% of around £700 billion. The NEF said the bank could pay interest on a smaller portion of reserves. That would mean savings of £11.5 billion per year, far lower than the reform's £35 billion claim. A 2022 report for the Institute for Fiscal Studies by Harvard Kennedy School research fellow and former Bank of England deputy Governor Sir Paul Tucker said that as interest rates were rising, the current system will add to strains on the public finances. Whether or not it's a good idea, it would raise a lot less than 30. Okay, that number did seem kind of high, but all right. From UK's revenue projections, therefore, appear to be overstated by at least £15 billion and possibly as much as $30 billion. Based. Okay. Okay, net zero is crippling our economy. We're doing this one today, I think. Law and order. More bobbies on the beat. More bobbies on the beat. More police. 40,000 new police officers. Common sense policing, not woke policing. 10,000 new detention places. Damn, they want to spend a lot. Scrap interest on student loans. Bro, this is the best thing ever. You just fucking promise everything to the people and cut all the taxes. This is amazing. This is fucking retarded. Am I missing something huge, or is it really this stupid? They had transgender ideology in primary and secondary schools. No gender questioning, social transitioning, or pronoun swapping. Thank God. Tax relief of 20% on all independent education. A patriotic curriculum in primary and secondary schools. Any teaching about a period or example of British or European imperialism or slavery must be paired with the teaching of a non-European occurrence of the same to ensure balance. Oh my God. Whoo, yikes. Based. All right. King. Literally kings. Motivate up to 2 billion people back to work. Employment is critical to improving mental health. Tax relief for businesses that undertake apprenticeships. All job seekers and those fit to work must find employment within 2 months, or within 4 months, or accept a job after 2 offers. Otherwise, benefits are withdrawn. Oh, so are they trying to cut benefits for the unemployed, basically? Are they expecting to save enough money there? Benefits, pledges, savings equals, what is, I'm seeing this PA number, 15 billion PA. What does PA mean? Per annum, per year. Why not put /year? You guys are so fucking weird. God, I can't stand you bonger fucks. Independence for Britain's armed forces. We're going to build a military. They have the best and bravest. Increase defense spending to 2.5% of national GDP by year 3, then 3% within 6 years. Okay. New dedicated ministerial department for veterans. Recruit 30,000 for the army. What the fuck? Wait, hold on. Reform wants to. Let's get all this. I'm halfway through this document. To dramatically decrease the amount of immigrants coming into the country. Cut taxes across the board, including abolishing the inheritance tax. I don't know how much money this actually costs, but whatever. Well, for all estates under £2 million. I don't know what the fucking pound symbol is. Do I have that? Is that on the American keyboard? Apparently people care a lot about inheritance shit in the UK or something. Cut lots of corporate tax rates. Corporate and VAT tax rates. Eliminate all. Eliminate wait time for the NHS while fully staffing it. Excess deaths and vaccine harms, public inquiry. Oh no. Excess deaths are nearly as high as they were during the COVID pandemic. Young people are overrepresented. Is that supposed to be a you're whistleblowing to the vaccines or maybe causing people to die? Recruit 40,000 new police officers. Build 10,000 new... A detention place, is that basically like a jail? Start expansion in capacity of state-built and managed prisons so that life means life for those who endanger the public. Commission disused military bases if needed. Oh no, this is like prisons. Criminal justice budget. Add tax incentives for education. Increase spending from, what was it, 2.5% GDP to what? Oh, wait, is 10,000 new places? Does that mean 10,000 like jail cells or something? Or like rooms or housing? New detention places. Oh, that must mean maybe? I'm guessing it's at 2%. Spending from 2% of GDP to 3% of GDP for the armed forces. Recruit 30,000 more people to the military. Mandate single-sex places. Public toilets and changing areas must provide single-sex facilities. What the fuck? I thought that was the thing that Europeans usually bragged about. Like, I feel like a lot in Stockholm. I don't know if I saw them as much in London, but through Sweden, there was always like unisex bathrooms. You just walk into a big room and there's like stalls on each side. It doesn't matter if you're a boy or girl. Do people care about this a lot more in the UK or something? UK schools have unisex bathrooms so kids can manage it, but not adults. A lot of trans stuff in here, but okay. Increase the farming budget. What do they spend? The fishers. I think we etc. this. They ditched the manifesto.
When you said at the time of the election that you were going to raise the higher rate of income tax threshold to £70,000, that's off the agenda.
No, at the end of the day, the key things we're focusing on is the aspiration, not day one, but the aspiration to make work pay for the lowest earners by lifting the starting point of income tax from £12,500 to £20,000. That's the thing to focus on. Okay. To achieve that, we've got to make the spending cuts by slashing net stupid zero. We can make substantial cuts and other changes.
So abolishing VAT on energy bills, inheritance tax, corporation tax, VAT, all gone.
That was a list for the time. Now we're in a completely different time.
Those tax cuts have all gone.
All aspirational, good ideas, but at the end of the day, the finances of the country are in a terrible state. They're going to get worse. As Nigel talked about today, we're very worried about the bond markets. We've got to focus on cutting the wasteful spending, making work pay, making small businesses want to take more risk. That will create growth. Then you can do...
It's fucking retarded. Okay. I'm citing this because it sounds like they haven't put anything else out in the meantime. Annualized savings over 5 years, and their largest line item on savings is cutting waste and fraud. Ugh, or just waste, I guess. Holy fucking cringe. Okay. Jesus. Can I get... Let me chew through this real quick.
Ukraine, I think we can't just...
One second.
skate past Ukraine. It's an issue that is not just close to your heart, it's part of your identity. You've got Ukrainian mother, a Russian father. You've just done some wonderful exchanges with your father, a 3-part conversation, and you disagree about that. But you...
Why is it that when he says he was born in the Soviet Union, but when he talks about his mom and dad, he doesn't have a Soviet mother, he has a Ukrainian mother? Is that...
You model civil disagreement, and you, I think, I've been watching a lot of mainstream media on Ukraine and Russia, and it's I wouldn't say it's unhinged, but they find it very, very difficult to inhabit both sides. And there's this sort of, maybe it's a case of World War II brain, where, Zelensky is Churchill, Putin is Hitler, and Trump and Vance are Chamberlains for refusing to, be as aggressive as maybe the Biden administration was. I think you bring a lot of you bring a very granular approach to what's going on there. At the time of recording, attempts are being made to negotiate with Moscow. It's not looking very hopeful. Where do you see this going? Is it just a completely futile effort by the Americans to get some peace negotiations going? And how do you see this ending?
Well, so many questions there. It's a difficult issue. I mean, there's quite a lot to unpack. So let me just take a few. Okay. This guy, Konstantin, has a very granular view on things. Wow. And he just said he got a lot of questions and there's a lot to unpack. Okay. Do you think we're going to get actual substantive analysis of the underlying issues? Or are we about to speak in the most broadest fucking terms you've ever heard in your entire fucking life? Few of the points, and they're quite separate. So first of all, on the framing of, Zelensky's Churchill, if people want to make that argument, I actually don't have a particular problem with it. Zelensky very courageously marshaled his country in its defense with the consent of the people, by the way. The ordinary Ukrainian, having had their country invaded already in 2014 and essentially watched pieces of their land being taken away, were not prepared to let it happen again. That's just a fact. Whether people who like that or not is irrelevant. That is true. It's also true that it is because of his leadership that they were able to withstand an invasion by a much more powerful country, and it's because of his leadership that they were able to secure the help from the West in order to do that. My issue is that it was very clear to me from I said this on Question Time literally 3 days after the conflict started, that the way this conflict inevitably would end, and I'm the most pro-Ukrainian person you're ever going to find, is a settlement negotiation. And what Ukraine needed to do was to give Russia a bloody nose, to deter further aggression, and then to come to the table and to say, look, you've got Crimea, we're probably not going to get it back ever. Let's just accept that that's happened, but in exchange, we're going to have permanent, physical security on the border. In other words, a peacekeeping force or something like that. That was always, for me, the objectives the Ukrainians were pursuing. And my issue with the Biden administration and others around Europe as well was, well, if you're saying Slava Ukraini, Zelensky is Churchill, then you have to give him the level of support that the Americans under Lend-Lease gave to Britain and the Soviet Union and other countries. In other words, you have to throw the kitchen sink at this and help the Ukrainians actually defend themselves. What we ended up with is, in my view, the worst of both worlds, which is partial practical support combined with very high levels of emotional support. In other words, no, please keep fighting and we'll give you just enough to not lose rapidly. And that's partly because in this emotional frenzy that we saw 3 years ago and since, none of these people actually asked themselves what the end result was going to be. How is this going to end? And therefore, what they do to people who ask questions about this, and this is very sad for me, as someone who's very pro-Ukrainian, they say, well, you're not supporting Ukraine sufficiently with your rhetoric. And they will criticize you for it. But no one ever asks them what they think should happen, because doing more of what we're currently doing is only hurting Ukraine. I mean, most people don't care about Russian soldiers dying. I care about both people's being killed as a result of this war, but primarily Ukrainians, of course. I don't think the policy of just continuing the conflict without offering them support they need is rational. It doesn't help Ukraine to do that. So my first claim is that we failed to back up our words with practical action. And that is why the Ukrainians have ended up, despite their heroism, absolute heroism, despite hundreds of thousands, I expect at this point, of young men laying down their lives for their country bravely, in a way that I think is to be celebrated and deserves all the praise that we can give them. Despite that, I don't think the result we've got to is what any of us would have wanted, because that support wasn't given to them properly. So that's the first argument that I would say. The second argument is about, a lot of people like to argue about NATO expansion. I think it's a perfectly valid point to point this out. The one thing that never gets asked of those people, and I think it's a very important thing to ask, is if NATO hadn't expanded eastward, where do you think Vladimir Putin's tanks or his influence would be now in Eastern Europe? And we know from history, we know from pure geopolitics analysis, that Russia expands westwards every time it can. For all sorts of economic and historical and geographical reasons, it needs to expand westwards to feel more secure. So if NATO hadn't expanded, well, Vladimir Putin might not be in war in Ukraine because he might be in control of all of Eastern Europe. And is that a price we were willing to pay for that? That's a whole different conversation that seems to me never gets had. In terms of the negotiations, I think negotiations at this point are necessary, but I've said for a long time, including prior to the election of President Trump, that in my very non-expert assessment, I don't see how you can have a real negotiation when you keep signaling that you're desperate for negotiations to go as quickly as possible, and also when you're frankly unwilling to have a stick as well as a carrot. The Trump administration's offering seems to be, we'll send this guy who doesn't know anything about Ukraine over to Moscow. He'll be really nice to President Putin. We'll say that Putin's not a murderer, he's not a dictator, he's a great guy, and we want to do business with him. But what do you do when he then inevitably starts messing you around because that's in his interest? He knows you want to wrap this up quickly. He knows you don't care really about the outcome. So you're then in a position where you're increasingly forced to demand more and more concessions from Ukraine without being able to demand anything of Russia in return. And that's essentially where the negotiations are currently ending up. Russia is basically going, oh, you want a deal? Okay, well, get the Ukrainians to give this up and to give this up and to give this up and to give this up. We want them to have an army that's incapable of defending their country at the end of this. We don't want any foreign forces on the ground, etc. So my concern is that the deal the Ukrainians laid down their lives for is not likely to be forthcoming, given the way that the American administration is approaching this. And for that reason, I think there is some merited criticism of that approach. While also, I wrote a whole article and did a very popular video about why Zelensky really messed up in the Oval Office. So I really tried to have a balanced perspective on this. But as I currently look at this, my sense is we're heading to a very bad deal for Ukraine and therefore the world. And this is why I say, James, why is it a bad deal for the world? The first and most obvious thing, I think, to anyone who follows this even remotely closely is Ukraine was in a position where it was encouraged to give up the nuclear weapons it had in its possession. Now, there's some debate about, did they have command and control? Separate conversation. The fact of the matter is, if we live in a world in which powerful countries can invade smaller countries, and there is no, the word policeman said, I'm not interested in policing, I'm done. I was discredited by beating up Iraq and Afghanistan and messing around in Libya and messing around in those places. I'm taking a step back. I've got stuff to look at after home. I've got 3 kids and well, then you end up in a world in which everyone needs to get a gun. And then the risk of nuclear proliferation seems to me utterly inevitable because it would be the most logical thing for every small country to pursue. If the Americans aren't going to protect us from Russia invading or China invading or whoever invading, we have to get the most powerful deterrent we possibly can. So there's a risk of nuclear proliferation. And then, of course, if Ukraine comes out of this negotiation with no security other than some words on a piece of paper, I think it's inevitable that it will be invaded again down the line, at which point we're back where we started, but worse.
Okay. This feels like a standard take. I don't understand where he says Western media gets Ukraine wrong. I feel like this is like the bog standard take on everything that's happened, but... Okay. Net zero. Do I care about this? No, I don't. How do we do... Fuck. What's like a good summary of... Net zero energy policy, United Kingdom? Oh, what is this?
Net zero.
You've been lied to about net zero. This sounds like it's going to be very politically oriented in a certain direction, but fine, fuck it. Let's go.
Net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero madness.
You are being lied to about net zero, one of the biggest, most expensive ideas in human history. You are being lied to by politicians who are misrepresenting the facts while accepting huge money from private business. You are being lied to so rich men can get even richer.
Oh
Let's
boy.
talk about how. Net zero refers to the idea of emitting no more carbon into the Earth's atmosphere than is removed by other processes. So it doesn't mean not emitting anything, but rather bringing carbon emissions down to as low as possible and then offsetting any remainder, either through natural processes like restoring wetlands or planting trees, or through technological fixes.
Wait. I'm sorry, I need to listen. Accent plus complicated topic. I can't read something and watch this.
Rather, bringing carbon emissions down to as low as possible and then offsetting any remainder, either through natural processes like restoring wetlands or planting trees, or through technological fixes like carbon capture and storage.
We have to clean up the electricity system, stop burning fossil fuels to generate electricity, and replace that with clean power. We have to massively expand the electricity system, and that's because as part of getting to net zero, we're going to have to electrify a lot of energy end uses. We'll be driving electric vehicles.
Vibing this out, I would never, ever, ever do an ultra aggressive climate-based energy policy if I wasn't roped into some kind of international treaty with a bunch of other countries. Otherwise, I feel like you're putting yourself at a really big disadvantage. But we'll see.
Buses, even electric trucks. We have to electrify the way we heat our buildings, particularly homes. And places like Northern Europe, most homes are heated with fossil fuels, with gas boilers. That's going to have to change. We have to electrify large parts of industry, whether it's like the Port Talbot steelworks, where they're replacing a blast furnace that burned coal with an electric arc furnace. And then there's a bunch of really hard stuff that we're going to have to address, like aviation. But aviation's hard because the energy density of oil basically is really hard to beat. There's huge kind of challenges, massive investment requirements.
The total spend required to get us to net zero is so large and so widespread that it's difficult to estimate. The United Nations Environment Programme estimates that around $9.1 trillion.
The UK doesn't have its own fossil fuels, though, and gas is expensive as ever. I don't know how true that is, because I don't know what this North Sea shit is or what that means.
Of investment is needed per year between now and 2035, and that's not reaching net zero in 2035. It's for this reason that people around the world are questioning the cost.
Here in the UK, while the Labour government is doubling down on its net zero mission, the Conservative Party is increasingly moving away from net zero commitments, while Reform UK is explicitly campaigning against net zero.
With the cost of living, and in particular energy bills, at an all-time high, it is entirely reasonable to question whether the UK government should spend billions of pounds on a high-level concept, especially when the UK contributes less than 1% of all carbon emissions.
And fact-driven debate should be the bedrock of how we conduct civil society, here in the UK and around the world, which is why it is so disturbing that politicians are straight up lying to you.
There is absolutely a playbook that people are using to try and put people off net zero, to try and make it seem really hard, really expensive, really difficult, or even impossible.
Let's go through the playbook in 5 steps.
Whoa.
The first step that often comes in this playbook is to make the cost of net zero or an individual solution, whether that's EVs or heat pumps, seem as expensive as you possibly can.
A classic technique is using out-of-date numbers. Because the cost of green solutions like EVs and solar panels and batteries have plummeted over the past couple of decades, older studies of the cost of net zero tend to be much higher than more recent numbers. Here in the UK, we are lucky to have the...
God damn. I thought this was going to be a goofy y-axis, but Jesus. $140 per watt to... Is W watt, or is that going to be like in... Yeah, I think it's just watt, right? To like 0.3 cents per watt down here, or less. And then price of lithium-ion batteries from $7,523 per kilowatt hour to $200, $181. Jesus.
Studies of the cost of net zero tend to be much higher than more recent numbers. Here in the UK, we are lucky to have the Independent Climate Change Committee, who have published 7 reports on the expected cost of getting the UK to net zero.
What's really interesting about the latest numbers from the Climate Change Committee is they're a lot lower than they used to be. People might remember, and it's been thrown a lot of these sort of big, scary sounding numbers. It's going to cost like more than £1 trillion to get to net zero for the UK. That was the old number from the Climate Change Committee a few years ago. They said 1.3 trillion in investments, but that's all gone. That's out of date. The cost of clean energy technologies has fallen sufficiently that they now think that it's actually like 700 billion of investments.
The cost of net zero to the taxpayer, figures produced by the Institute of Government, are estimated between 2025 and 2030 to cost £45 billion every single year.
Here, Farage seems to be referencing this document from the Institute for Government, which is actually quoting the Climate Change Committee's previous report. And incidentally, in that report, the committee very clearly say that the majority of new investment can and should come from the private sector. So the government isn't going to be spending tens of billions of pounds extra per year on net zero. The private sector is instead. The government will be spending a few billion extra per year.
Because of the brilliant work that we, the whole industry, have already done, it's now got significantly cheaper. And here's some even better news. The public sector actually has to put in significantly less than we did in the first phase. The figures are roughly that the private sector will fund around 22 billion per year into the new energy system, and the public sector 4 billion. I mean, that seems a pretty damn good ratio to me.
Now, £4 billion a year is still a lot of money, but...
So the second step often is to pretend that we can just carry on with business as usual and it won't cost us anything. Let's say we're talking about decarbonising transport, and then people say, oh, but an EV, that's going to cost like £40,000, that's a huge investment. That's expensive, right? And you add that up over all of the cars in the country and you suddenly get a big scary number again. Let's say we just carry on with petrol cars. Petrol cars aren't free, right? Okay, maybe you own a petrol car now, so you don't have to buy a new one, but that won't last forever. So that's step 2, is you basically pretend that the existing system, which we've already built and paid for, can just carry on forever and won't ever need replacing.
Another example of this is in electricity production. Here in the UK, we get about 15% of our electricity from nuclear power, but our nuclear fleet is aging changing, the majority of reactors are set to be decommissioned by the end of the decade. To keep the lights on, those plants have got to be replaced. So talking about how expensive new wind and solar projects are, without mentioning the alternative, which is how expensive gas-fired power plants are, is, well, disingenuous, and it makes those wind and solar projects look much more expensive. And further,
Step 3 is you just pretend there aren't any operational savings from investing in clean energy solutions. For a gas-fired power station, you have to buy gas every year to keep it running, right? And that's the major cost of doing so. For a wind and solar plant, like, you have this upfront investment cost. Once you built it, there's no fuel costs. So if you just pretend that saving of not having fuel costs doesn't exist, then obviously...
disingenuous, and it makes those wind and solar projects look much more expensive. And further,
Step 3 is you just pretend there aren't any operational savings from investing in clean energy solutions. For a gas-fired power station, you have to buy gas every year to keep it running, right? And that's the major cost of doing so. For a wind and solar plant, like, you have this upfront investment cost. Once you built it, there's no fuel costs. So if you just pretend that saving of not...
There's no fuel costs, but I'm sure they're probably a lot less than fuel costs, but there's still going to be operational maintenance costs to running the whatever wind or solar shit, but it'll be less than probably buying fuel shit.
Having fuel costs doesn't exist, then obviously it makes it seem more expensive to get to net zero.
To return to the numbers from the Climate Change Committee's most recent report, they estimate that over 25 years, the UK needs to invest £700 billion into net zero. And over those...
Same with gas, yeah, but the same can be said for gas too. Gas plants have maintenance costs as well, though. Oh, I thought you just bought gas, you didn't have to maintain any of that ever. That's true, thank you. Thank you, 3 chatters, for that, thank you.
25 years, the UK will experience £600 billion of operational savings.
Damn. Wait, did you say 600 billion?
Into net zero. Committee's most recent report, they estimate that over 25 years, the UK needs to invest £700 billion into net zero. Okay. And over those 25 years, the UK will experience £600 billion of operational savings, meaning that the net cost of net zero is actually £100 billion spread over 25 years, so £4 billion per year. For reference, that's 0.1% of the UK's GDP. This is also actually mentioned in the previous report that Farage was citing. They quite clearly say that net zero might actually pay for itself by the early 2040s. Strange that he admitted that.
Classic number 4 in this playbook is just to ignore the co-benefits. What I mean by that is, say we replace all our petrol cars, which obviously have exhaust emissions. You walk down the street and it's stinky, right? That's air pollution. If you replace all of your cars with electric cars, you get rid of that. That brings enormous health benefits, just in terms of quality of life, but also in terms of less people suffering from asthma and so on.
Perhaps the most reputable numbers on this come from The Lancet, who publish an annual report on the impact of climate change on human health. They estimate that 2 million deaths a year are influenced by burning fossil fuels through air pollution. Though, because rich countries have started moving away from burning fossil fuels, and especially coal, that number has actually already come down by maybe 250,000 deaths per year. But aside from the health impact, electrifying systems makes them much more energy efficient. I've made a whole video about that.
And once you have built out a grid based on renewables, you are not dependent on other countries for fuel, as we currently are. See excellent reporting by Simon on this. Energy security and health are massive reasons to invest in renewables, but they're not the big one.
Basically pretending that there is no cost to not zero. Just say, oh, come on guys, let's just pretend this isn't a problem. Even though we know we're seeing already now escalating costs of extreme weather events, whether it's heat waves, floods, specifically, like...
Oh my God. Where do they set up? Where do they set up the wind turbines? Everywhere? What if they just set all the wind turbines up in the ocean here, and then they can just use them to blow away the small boats? So you have it set to blow enough to blow away the small boats, not the big boats you want to come in. That's 2 birds with 1 stone, baby.
The Office for Budget Responsibility in the UK recently said unchecked global warming would basically shave 8% off UK GDP by the sort of second half of the century. The costs of inaction are much, much bigger than the costs of getting to net zero. And actually that might even be an underestimate. Some sort of Institute of Actuaries that recently put out a report saying actually global GDP could halve, like 50% off, not in a good way, if we don't do anything about climate change. So yeah, sure, you can pretend that's not going to happen, but then you're basically just, you're lining up much, much bigger costs. And that's particularly true for countries in the global south, vulnerable populations around the world, but it's also true for places like the UK. Again, the OBR looked at this and they said it would add huge amounts to government debt. Basically, you would have less productive workers, less tax revenue, less GDP growth.
You can never bring this part up because conservatives don't believe in climate change, so that doesn't matter.
We can't afford net zero. It's destroying the country.
So these are the 5 steps of the anti-net zero playbook. Inflate the costs, ignore the cost of business as usual, ignore the operational savings, ignore the co-benefits, and most egregiously, ignore the costs of inaction. Not getting to net zero is going to cost the world much, much more in the long run. Now this has been spelled out, it becomes so obvious to spot. these politicians are lying to you. But why?
Before I answer that, I just want to quickly mention that if you are watching this video in the first couple of weeks after upload, I am currently training to swim a half marathon to raise money for my local cancer hospice. This is going to hurt a lot. I made a whole video about why I'm doing this, which is linked below, along with my fundraiser page. Please do give that a watch, and if you can, please do donate.
Okay, let's get to the why. Generally speaking, it's not because these people deny the existence of climate change. The overwhelming majority of people around the world, and here in the UK, accept the overwhelming evidence that climate change is happening, and a serious problem. Instead, what we're increasingly hearing, including from Kemi Badenoch, the current head of the Conservatives, is that they are not climate skeptics, but they are net zero skeptics, which has some inconsistency.
This just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Literally the only way to stop climate change, whether you want to limit warming to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees or 3 degrees, the only way to stop it getting hotter is to get to net zero emissions. That's it. That's just a fact of life. It's physics. You can't kind of argue with that.
So this is the straw man version that's put out, and I don't know if people believe this. If people believe this, I would say this is retarded. But the straw man version that's put out that attacks people that are talking about net zero, from my perspective, is saying you're trying to kill all of our fossil fuel, which is going to destroy our economy in an attempt to rush to green energy. And we're not going to survive in the interim period. Now, if people are trying to do that, I would say that's retarded, right? That you have to continue to consume fossil fuels, and then ideally you're tapering off as you're making public and private investments into renewable energies that eventually will pick up and hopefully replace your fossil fuel consumption in the future. But I don't know if that's the actual position, I guess, in the UK, whether I need to look up why are energy costs expensive and just all of that, I guess. Is it really because of net zero stuff? Is it because of the war in Ukraine and stuff with Russia, or what? Yeah, I'm just not sure.
If you're a net zero skeptic, you're basically saying, I don't want to stop it getting hotter.
I think there are two basic reasons for this disconnect. Firstly, as I've already mentioned, the UK represents less than 1% of all carbon emissions. China, the USA, and India all emit far more. And so British politicians will ask, why should we cut our emissions when China isn't doing anything?
Ignoring the fact that China's emissions have likely peaked and they're building twice as many renewables as the rest of the world combined.
China isn't doing anything.
Ignoring the fact that China's emissions have likely peaked and they're building twice as many renewables.
I don't like this bullshit. When people talk about us needing to compete with China and everything, I think it started in 2021 or 2? It was a while ago where China what am I trying to remember? It's like, I think like in 1 year, China built more solar panels than the United States had in the entire country. It was like some insane amount of expansion that they've been doing into renewables. And then every time in the US, when people talk about shit, people are like, oh, well, how are we going to beat China if we, keep doing this gay shit? It's like, China's literally doing that gay shit, bro. What are you talking about?
Renewables as the rest of the world combined.
This is a global problem. Everyone's emissions harm everyone else. But just because you're a small part of the problem doesn't mean you have no responsibility to be part of the solution. A global problem requires a global solution.
If every country that was like 1 or 2% of emissions said, well, we're only 1 or 2% emissions, so why bother? Then we obviously won't ever solve it. There's like a handful of massive emitters, China by far and away in terms of current emissions the biggest. But then there's like, a lot of countries that are literally only like 0.5%, 1%. We can't solve it unless everyone does their bit.
And the UK has a special responsibility, being the country that started the coal-fired industrial revolution and set the world down a path ending in the climate crisis. This is a good book on the historical context.
But the second, much bigger reason is the link between politicians and the fossil fuel industry. There exists a three-way relationship between the media, politicians, and the public. The media such as newspapers, will report on topics that they see as being in the national interest, which is partly determined by who owns those papers, but also by the politicians of the day and what the public is talking about. Politicians will then read those papers and offer to the public policies that they think, based on what they have read, will get them votes. There's this complicated relationship that then emerges between all three parties. But two sides of this triangle are influenced by industry. And in this case, I mean the energy industry dominated by fossil fuel companies, who see net zero as an existential threat to their business model. And so, through financial incentives, will alter what politicians are offering to the public and what the media is talking about and how.
This can rapidly become a self-sustaining feedback as a nudge from industry changes what the media focus on, which changes what politicians talk about to the public, which changes what becomes the national conversation, which feeds back to what the media report on, and so on.
And in some countries, this influence is extremely clear and well documented.
The US, where there's huge amounts of corporate money go into political lobbying and funding campaigns, it's clear there's tens of millions of dollars went into the Trump campaign ahead of the election last year, and tens of millions of dollars went into his kind of post-inauguration fundraising. There is like a much clearer line that you can draw between some of that funding and some of that lobbying and actual actual things that they've implemented through that, the kind of one big beautiful bill, so-called. There's some of that stuff which is very clearly like fossil fuel industry asked for it, fossil fuel gave them money, and then the bill had those things, literally drafted by fossil fuel funded, think tanks and so on.
And this kind of influence isn't new. See our previous video on how the US government deliberately sabotaged climate talks in the 1980s.
While here in the UK, there is a definite link between right-wing politicians like Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, and Kemi Badenoch, and the fossil fuel industry. Reporting from DSMOG found that by mid-2024, the Reform Party had accepted £2.3 million in donations from the fossil fuel industry and climate skeptics, representing 92% of all donations to the party. And in entirely unrelated news, just this month, Reform published a bizarre letter online that seemingly threatened renewable energy companies with cancelled contracts should Reform win the next election.
And presumably also unrelated, last year Nigel Farage was present at the launch of the UK branch of the Heartland Institute, a right-wing think tank bankrolled by fossil fuel companies. Also in attendance were prominent members of the Conservative Party.
In the same reporting, which is linked down below, it's worth reading in full, since 2019, the Conservative Party was found to have accepted £8.4 million of donations from similar sources.
People like Neil Record, who's the chair of the sort of UK's biggest climate skeptic lobby group, Net Zero Watch, he basically donated his house to run Kemi Badenoch's leadership campaign for the Conservative Party. She ran her campaign out of his house. I don't know, I can't speculate as to whether her kind of anti-net zero stance came because of that relationship with Neil Record, or whether because of her net zero stance he was like, okay, that's my kind of politician, I'm going to support her. I don't know which way around that is, but there's obviously some links there.
We cannot definitively say that the recent rise in anti-net zero rhetoric in the UK is explicitly because of the fossil fuel industry. But millions of pounds have flowed from that industry to right-wing politicians and political parties, and those parties have certainly ramped up their anti-net zero rhetoric. And it's not hard to see the link between a political party getting 92% of its donations from individuals and companies that would benefit from net zero being scrapped, and that party's economic policy being scrapping net zero.
A policy, by the way, that has been widely, repeatedly described as complete fantasy.
These techniques are used over and over and over again to convince you of a lie, that net zero is ruinously expensive or even impossible. And that's not only incorrect, but it is dangerous to say that, because we know what the alternative to net zero is. It is climate breakdown. And we know why these lies are being spread. It's because of the people responsible for that climate breakdown. It's because of fossil fuel millionaires and billionaires seeking to become even richer by artificially extending the lifespan of their industry that we know is burning our future and already killing millions of people every year.
Next time you hear these lies, know who is really talking. It's big business, and they do not care about you. They care about their profits.
One thing that drives me absolutely potty is when I hear that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. That's what they tell us. That clearly is absolutely nuts.
A few weeks ago, I was asked a question by a patron, and I think it's worth giving my answer here as well. When I make a YouTube video, obviously, I want people to watch it. And that's partly because when people watch it, Google puts adverts next to the video, and I get half of the ad revenue. Google keeps the...
Wait, is that it?
I have many exclusive videos on Nebula. This is the value of the company.
Okay, we love you. Thank you. Wait, one more quick one. What is this?
Today we can make the United Kingdom the first major economy in the world to commit to ending our contribution to global warming forever.
In 2019, the UK was the first G7 country to set a net zero target, and with that it was an important inspiration and motivation to other countries globally to also pursue such new climate targets.
Well, net zero matters to us because it's about the future of our planet. It's about the future of our lives, the future of our economy, the future of our societies. So we need to take net zero seriously.
We can't pretend it's not happening. We've seen in all the studies that if we don't get to net zero, the climate will continue to warm. As it continues to warm, all these other effects will carry on as well. My name is Joanna Haigh. By training, I am an atmospheric physicist. I started in physics in general, and then I became more and more interested in environment and atmospheric physics. Eventually, I seem to have ended up as co-director of the Grantham Institute on Climate Change and Environment, which was a great privilege, and I enjoyed it enormously. 2019 felt special, I think partly because there was so much energy behind it, so much momentum building from all aspects of society, right the way from grassroots organisations, through scientists, through government bodies, and policymakers and businesses, and everybody, I think, was almost on message then, and they really wanted to do something about it. The Grantham Institute's main concern was and is climate change and its effects. One thing that we did was write a report, which was submitted to the Climate Change Committee, indicating on how we could, as a country, meet the emission reduction targets. As well as writing reports, we also got more involved with people around and what they were thinking and doing.
Thousands of pupils in the UK expected to walk out of class later today.
This can't be real. I can't believe this is so stupid. Everybody keeps saying this, and somebody just linked this. The marginal price mechanism. This can't be a thing. When was this set? Like, if what I've read is correct, basically, like, let's say that you get 1% of your energy from fossil fuels, and it costs $1,000 per watt, and then you get 99% of your energy from renewables, and they cost 1 cent per watt, then you have to pay for every single watt you get as though it was that top price. That can't be the case. It just sounds so stupid. Under the NPM, wholesale electricity prices in the UK are set by the most expensive source of energy needed to meet demand, which is typically natural gas. While gas plants generate only about 30% of Britain's electricity, they set the wholesale price 98% of the time. This means that even when renewables supply the majority of electricity, consumers still pay the gas-based rate. Where does the extra money go to? What's more, this flawed setup produces perverse outcomes. There are times when the grid pays wind turbines to switch off because it's too windy, while simultaneously paying gas generators to fire up. The website Waste Wind Energy illustrates this contradiction with daily data. As a result, the financial benefits of renewables are not reflected in people's energy bills, and the perception that clean energy is driving up costs, while false, could be allowed to spread unchallenged. What? The previous government considered severing the link between gas and electricity prices through a review of electricity market arrangements, but those proposals have been sidelined with the focus shifting instead to more limited reforms such as regional pricing. This just seems so stupid. That's how the companies, that's how they get companies to build the wind farms, promising outrageous prices. Net zero stuff.
To take part in a series of global youth protests about climate change.
Several of us from the Institute walked down to Westminster wearing special T-shirts saying, "I'm a scientist, ask me questions," and joined the demonstration at Parliament and did answer a lot of questions. And it was really engaging to be talking to so many enthused people.
I'm Yuri Rogel. I'm Director of Research at the Grantham Institute and a Professor of Climate Science and Policy here at Imperial College. And I was one of the coordinating lead authors of the IPCC 1.5 degree special report. In 2019, there was a set of conditions that came together and made it the perfect time to set net zero targets. First of all, there was the Paris Agreement that was adopted in 2015. That Paris Agreement set out a target to limit warming well below 2 degrees while pursuing to limit warming to 1.5. It also set a global net zero target. It says that countries need to reduce their emissions as soon as possible to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions.
Is this just the climate change part of this bullshit, or?
By a number of other scientists from around the country.
Importance of the scientific evidence that you...
I don't care about this.
Unfortunately, in recent times, the whole idea of net zero has become politically charged, such that some political parties are actually picking it up, denying its necessity, and arguing against it. This is really, really scary, because the science...
Deswtiny, that's how supply and demand work. If you're satisfying your demand for copper at $100, you're giving that price to every supplier, not just the expensive ones. What? I imagine generally you would want to shop between suppliers and choose the cheapest supplier for, if assuming a kilowatt is a watt is a watt. What do you mean? My understanding of the NPM reasoning is that otherwise sources necessary to meet demand would become unprofitable since 100% cannot be gotten from cheap renewables. How would it, what do you mean unprofitable? Just the percentage of your bill would represent that or something, no? The purpose is so renewables have a larger profit margin, so private money pays for more renewable generation. Okay, I feel like there should be that sounds cringe though. That's so much money for those people. I guess it's like a form of subsidy that's kind of paid for by the consumer who's consuming the energy. That's cringe. I don't know. I feel like it's cringe. Or maybe in the very beginning, maybe you would have needed this as a form of subsidy, but yeah, just do carbon taxes. Fuck all that shit. Okay, last video on this. What is this?
Average Brit, what's gone wrong in the UK? They'll probably mention high taxes, the near perma-crisis in the NHS, maybe the cost of living or student loans. They're unlikely, however, to mention energy, despite the fact that the UK currently suffers from some of the highest energy prices in the world, and that this has a pernicious effect on the economy more broadly. So in this video, we're going to look at the UK's oft-overlooked loans. They're unlikely, however, to mention energy, despite the fact that the UK currently suffers from some of the highest energy prices in the world.
And this price per kilowatt hour is what the consumer is paying based on this marginal market mechanism, right? I think.
And that this has a pernicious effect on the economy more broadly. So in this video, we're going to look at the UK's oft-overlooked but very serious energy crisis, how we got here, and why, depressing as this might be, there is a silver lining. We're in the process of clearing out our store, so we're running a fire sale right now. Using code FIRESALE, you can get 40% off all of our posters, notebooks, calendars, magnets, keyrings, Brexit, the colouring book, the lot. The offer ends very soon, so click the link in the description for more. So let's get straight into it. This is a bit of a generalisation, but broadly speaking, energy consumption can be split into two forms. Direct fuel consumption, which includes burning fuels for stuff like transport and heating, and
Well, either I'm missing something fundamental or you're oversimplifying the fuck or overgeneralizing how markets work. Every energy seller should sell for the highest amount that they can. The market mechanism lets the marginal energy producer set the price. This is markets working as they work. But that doesn't seem to be true because my guess is the consumer can't choose between different sources of energy supply. If they could, they would choose the cheaper price. I don't think there's any market where you compete on price by pricing your more economically viable good at the exact same price as your competitor. You would undercut them to compete, right? If somebody was getting 70% renewables and 30% fossil fuel at a house, but I could charge, if they were getting 30-70, but I know that I could get them to buy 100% from me, well, I guess you wouldn't have to compete on price if it was a government-enforced monopoly. This is like a collusion scheme, I guess. I guess if you're colluding, then you would do this. But in a free market, you would undercut the cost of the fossil fuel so they're getting 100% of the energy from you, assuming you could supply it. Now, if you were colluding with another supplier who had a monopoly on delivery of energy or whatever, then I guess you could do it. But this is not a free market or market principle, I don't think. This is like this would be like a monopolistic or a collusion thing, I feel.
Electricity consumption, which accounts for an ever-growing share of total energy consumption. The UK doesn't do too badly on the first front. Petrol prices in the UK, for instance, are broadly on a par with the rest of Europe, as are industrial gas prices. It's on the second front, however, where...
Wait, hold on.
Electricity consumption, which accounts for an ever-growing share of total energy consumption. The UK doesn't do too badly on the first front. Petrol prices in the UK, for instance, are broadly on a par...
Premium unleaded petrol prices and diesel prices, okay.
...with the rest of Europe, as are industrial gas prices. It's on the second front, however, where things look rubbish. Electricity in the UK is, to be frank, stupidly expensive. According to UK government data, electricity costs 27 pence per kilowatt hour for industrial users, the highest in the developed world by some distance, and 30 pence per kilowatt hour for domestic users, second only to Germany. It didn't used to be this way. As recently as the early 2010s, UK electricity prices weren't much higher than elsewhere. It's hard to overstate quite how terrible this is for the UK economy. High electricity costs have contributed to the UK's acute deindustrialisation, pushed up inflation, and crippled total energy consumption, which generally correlates with lower overall GDP.
I think it's cute the way Deswtiny describes cabals and corruption as a novel idea about capitalism that he has just discovered heart. Yes, everything is corrupt and evil in capitalism. One, retard. And number two, retard. This has to do with a government-related monopoly. So you're triply retarded for that statement, but cute.
Ironically, high electricity prices also make it harder to decarbonise because they discourage electrification. So, UK's acute deindustrialisation, pushed up inflation, and crippled total energy consumption, which generally correlates with lower overall GDP. Ironically, high electricity prices also make it harder to decarbonise because they discourage electrification. So, what went wrong? Well, commentators often blame the UK's so-called marginal pricing system. For context, every 30 minutes there's an auction where electricity generators submit bids essentially describing at what price they could generate electricity. The system operator then ranks each generator by price, and then goes up that ranking saying, yes, we'll need your electricity and your electricity and your electricity until they've got enough to meet demand. Importantly, however, in a marginal pricing system, the wholesale price of electricity is set by the most expensive source required. There are at least two problems with this system.
That's
First,
so
while it makes
crazy.
sense when most of our electricity was produced by burning fossil fuels, and there wasn't much difference in cost across generators, it makes less sense.
It sounds like a balanced video, so hopefully he's going to explain the why for this, or like what the strong argument is for this.
Now that our electricity comes from lots of different...
There must have been a YouTube video. I'm seeing a lot of people type this saying, that's just a regular market. Can you just link the YouTube video that all of you are biting this retarded opinion from? Or that explains it better than you're explaining in chat? Because there's no way that many people come together on a fucking point. That's how normal supply schedules work? No, it's not. If I could buy a shirt from Versace or Gucci or whatever for $1,000, or I could buy a shirt from Walmart at $10, everybody wouldn't list their shirts because some people buy the Versace shirts for $1,000. You would go to Walmart and you would buy the cheaper thing, unless there was a single unified shirt delivery mechanism to fulfill all the shirt requests that all of us had to go to and buy from. Every manufacturer was funneled into a single warehouse that we were all going to buy from. You would have to have the government monopoly there in order to do that. Or you would have to control the single delivery pipeline. I don't know why you're saying that's how all markets work. If that was how all markets work, then there would be no new tech or no new thing that would ever replace anything ever.
Different sources offering very different prices. If, for instance, solar generators say they can generate at 5 pence per kilowatt hour, and gas generators say 20 pence, unless solar and wind can power up the entire UK, the system operator ends up paying 20 pence per kilowatt hour, even though the average generation cost is way lower.
Those goods aren't perfectly transferable like energy is. That makes it even easier to, that's an even worse argument for you though. A kilowatt is a kilowatt. It shouldn't matter where it comes from. So I feel like it hurts you even more.
The second problem is that, because solar, wind, and other sources are rarely plentiful enough to meet total demand, the UK usually needs gas generators to step in, who end up setting a wholesale price. In fact, according to a paper published by UCL in 2023, between 2015 and 2021, gas ended up setting the wholesale price 98% of the time in the UK, more than any other European country. This leaves the UK electricity market uniquely vulnerable to changes in international gas prices, as we saw after Putin's invasion.
If you can make $1 with some amount of energy, you will buy energy until it costs $1. That is what they mean. Yeah, I understand that. This is the supply-demand graph. You sell things until the marginal cost of production meets the marginal cost of whatever fucking sucks your dick in the asshole or whatever. But if you could buy it for cheaper, you would, and the market would respond accordingly. Like, I think there's a type of market failure if this is the wind and solar, other renewables, gas, coal. If gas and coal over here are making up this percentage, what, like 98% or whatever of your power supply. If it's making up 40% or whatever here, and all of this should cost much cheaper, but that's not reflected at all in your bill whatsoever, the market equilibrium price is the price that everyone pays, not just the last unit sold. Yeah, but the market equilibrium is supposed to settle on a particular product, not a product that's forced. There has to be a YouTube video, or my brain is broken on this. There is either a YouTube video where somebody put this comment out, you guys are all copying from it, and you're not telling me where you got the opinion from, or my brain is actually fucking broken as fuck on this. The idea that there would be a market equilibrium that would bundle together things with completely and totally different input costs doesn't make any fucking sense. Can you name a single other market on the planet that prices that way? Wait, who just said that? Arzan 12. Say this to your permaband. Or tell me the YouTube video you got this idea from. Can you name me a single other market on the planet that functions this way? Arzan 12. I'm waiting. Arzan 12. Arzan 12. There is no market like energy. Okay. Then don't say that it's a simple market thing or this is how all markets clear prices or whatever. Stop. Okay, I don't care.
A European country. This leaves the UK electricity market uniquely vulnerable to changes in international gas prices, as we saw after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and explains why wholesale electricity prices have broadly tracked international gas prices in recent years.
So in the United States, when you sell energy back to the grid, if you have like solar or whatever, I don't know. Actually, I don't even know how it works in the United States. I don't know if they balance. I have no idea, actually.
But you get the idea. People often blame the UK's sky-high electricity prices on unmarginal pricing.
Although him saying things like this, maybe he's about to explain it. Because him saying things like this makes it sound like this is a unique British thing. But maybe he'll explain other people do this too.
More than any other European country. This leaves the UK electricity market uniquely vulnerable to changes in international gas prices, as we saw after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and explains why wholesale electricity prices have...
Is there a single other market on the planet where two completely different processes produce the exact same product? No, but they produce substitution products that are more or less the same, sure. I think the vast majority of Americans would consider a shirt from Neiman, whatever the fuck, with their $500 shirts, to be more or less comparable or can be substituted with a shirt from Target or Walmart. You would never pay whatever the cost is of a high value, whatever designer bullshit luxury brand with the same as more or less an equivalent substitutable good from another one. You would never do that. Like, you have substitution things that are more or less the same, right? Generic drugs versus brand name drugs might be another thing, yeah. But energy is perfectly transferable, not just highly transferable. I feel like that just helps my argument. If it's a perfect substitution, that would be even less incentive to buy the higher cost thing, no? Like, let's say that you got 30% of your energy fossil fuel, 70% of your energy renewable, but the fossil fuel was 5 times more expensive, right? And you're a normal consumer. If a consumer had access to a real market, do you think that some consumers would just say, you know what? I'm actually just going to consume 30% less energy if I can cut my bill by 90%. But you don't even have the option to do that. There's no actual competition between the energy suppliers here. If it's all wired down the same pipeline.
Tracked international gas prices in recent years. So you get the idea. People often blame the UK's sky-high electricity prices
on
the marginal pricing system, and the fact that, in this system, gas generators usually end up setting the price. But this isn't a sufficient explanation for at least 2 reasons.
Okay.
For starters, this alone doesn't explain why prices are so high. After all, lots of other countries also rely on gas. According to that paper we just mentioned, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Greece all rely on gas at least 80% of the time. Furthermore, that paper probably understates other countries' reliance on gas, because when countries like Ireland import electricity to meet demand, they're usually implicitly relying on gas, and when other countries like Spain use hydropower, this is often essentially price-matched to gas. And yet, all these countries enjoy significantly lower electricity prices than the UK. So, why is this?
Okay.
Well, quite a lot of this has to do with the fact that the marginal pricing system is even more broken than we just implied.
This is because once the system operator has accepted the bids and decided who gets paid, they then look at a map to see if this is actually going to work. Sometimes it doesn't. Quite often, for instance, all the wind farms in Scotland are generating lots of cheap electricity, but our grid can't carry all that electricity down to where it's needed, in more populated southern areas. This means that, quite often, Scottish wind farms have their bids accepted, but the operator then says, sorry, the grid can't actually carry your electricity down to where it's needed. These wind farms still get paid because they had their bids accepted, but they don't actually generate any electricity. The operator then has to go find another generator near where the demand centre.
What, do they not generate, or do they just not supply it? It's generated, but it doesn't actually revenue it? This, okay, I don't know, bro.
Just to fill the gap, which will be, by definition, even...
This is why renewables are dog shit? What? No, this is why this, whatever system this is fucking dog shit. This has nothing to do with renewables, and it sounds like it has everything to do with the retarded fucking pricing mechanisms that are enforced here. What?
The electricity. The operator then has to go find another generator near where the demand centres to fill the gap, which will be, by definition, even more expensive. Again, a few decades ago, this wasn't really a problem because our coal and gas powered stations were spread relatively evenly throughout the UK.
You can't infinitely pass electricity through grid. Localization matters. You can't build a fatter fucking wire? They have the fattest wires, the thickest, fattest, PHATTEST. They have the fattest wires possible. They cannot possibly transmit any more power. They've maxed it out. It's the biggest lines. They can't build any more. The ocean's full of them. All the whales are dying.
But it's becoming more of a problem with time, both because renewables are generally concentrated.
Here's an idea. Why don't you just stop drinking so much fucking tea, okay? Boom. Save some fucking electricity for the rest of your fellow bongers.
Gas-powered stations were spread relatively evenly throughout the UK. But it's becoming more of a problem with time, both because renewables are generally concentrated in certain geographically convenient areas and because our grid is outdated, with these so-called balancing costs expected to quadruple between 2022 and 2026. You get the idea. It's not just our reliance on gas, it's also our uniquely dysfunctional energy markets. But this all points to an even deeper question. Why are we so reliant on gas in the first place? Well, this is a difficult question and would probably require a whole other video, but the TLDR is that there aren't any easy alternatives. Our nuclear industry, for instance, is massively overregulated, as evidenced by the high and rising cost of plant construction. Solar doesn't work brilliantly in the UK because, while solar panels are becoming incredibly cheap, it's just not that sunny here. The UK is pretty windy, but the cost of new wind farms is actually rising, at least according to the most recent government auction. So that's at least a partial explanation of why energy prices in the UK are so high. As a final thing, there is a massive silver lining here, namely that it is frankly astonishing that we are as rich as we are while using as little energy as we do. Usually, energy consumption tracks GDP per capita. The UK is one of very few countries to break this trend. Our energy consumption has plummeted, and yet our GDP per capita has held steady. Today, our GDP per unit of energy is better than that of every other large economy, implying that, with even slightly more plentiful energy, the UK could be one of the richest countries in the world. Now, if you've stuck around this long, chances are you're passionate about learning and bettering yourself through knowledge, just like us. You're obviously a thinker, and Brilliant is the perfect learning platform to unlock your potential. That's because Brilliant pushes you to excel in maths and computer science, with visual, interactive problem solving and personalised practice. Their website and app is designed to be highly effective.
Why does it say of any large economy in the world? Is there like an economy in the world that's doing better than...
Offering the perfect mix of interactive...
Okay, whatever. Okay. Does this happen in the US as well? Let's find out.
June of 2000, the power shut off across much of the San Francisco Bay Area. There simply wasn't enough electricity to meet demands, so more than 1 million customers were disconnected.
The underutilization of the wind power is stupid, but the pricing being set by the most expensive makes sense. It still incentivizes production of the cheaper production methods because of higher profits. Yeah, but the issue is I feel like as a consumer, you're getting mega ass fucked. Like if I were to find out that 90% of the energy that I bought was operating at like a fucking 90% profit margin, I would want to have a way to access that energy without buying the expensive shit at all. I would just not buy it. I would just never buy the expensive shit ever.
In California's largest load shed event since World War II. It was just one of the many rolling blackouts that hit the state in the early 2000s. Known as the Western Energy Crisis, the shortages resulted in blackouts, soaring electricity prices, and ultimately around $40 billion in economic losses. But this time, the major cause of the issues had nothing to do with engineering. There were some outages and a lack of capacity from hydroelectric plants due to drought, but the primary cause of the disaster was economic. Power brokers, mainly Enron, were manipulating the newly deregulated market for bulk electricity, forcing prices to skyrocket. Utilities were having to buy electricity at crazy prices, but there was a cap on how much they could charge their customers for the power. One utility, PG&E, lost so much money it had to file for bankruptcy. And Southern California Edison almost met the same fate. Most of us pay an electric bill every month. It's usually full of cryptic line items that have no meaning to us. The grid is not only mechanically and electrically complicated, it's financially complicated too. We don't really participate in all that complexity. We just pay our bill at the end of every month. But it does affect us in big ways, so I think it's important at least to understand the basics, especially because if you're like me, it's really interesting stuff. I'm an engineer, I'm not an economist or finance expert, but at least in the US, if you really want to understand how the power grid works, you can't just focus on the volts and watts. You have to look at the dollars too. I'm Grady, and this is Practical Engineering. Electricity is not like any normal commodity we buy and sell. You can't go to the store and pick up a case of kilowatt hours. It can't really be stored or stockpiled on an industrial scale, which means it has to be created at essentially the exact instant it's needed, and the demand is fairly inelastic. We want our lights, stoves, air conditioners, and devices to turn on no matter the time of day. That requires the supply side to handle incredible volatility, ramping up or down to meet demands in real time. And the whole business is incredibly capital intensive. You need very expensive infrastructure for pretty much every step of the process. The only reason it can work is that we all share that infrastructure, spreading out the costs. Call me a nerd, but I think all of this creates some fascinating challenges both on the technical side for the engineers and the organizational side for the policymakers, regulators, and all the companies that participate in the electric power industry. It wasn't that long ago that electric utilities did it all. As the pros say, they were vertically integrated. Each utility owned and controlled the three major pieces of the grid within their service areas: generation or power plants, transmission lines, which carry electricity at high voltage across long distances, and a distribution system, which delivers electricity to most customers at lower voltages. That meant they had a monopoly. Customers couldn't choose where their power came from or how they got it. And that meant that electric utilities had to be carefully regulated to make sure that without any competition, they were still offering customers a reasonable price for power. Over time, utilities realized the value of interconnecting so they could help each other out in times of need. Electricity is a true commodity, even if it has some unusual properties. For the job it does, it mostly doesn't matter who made it. A kilowatt is a kilowatt, no matter where it came from. If one utility's power plant went down or bad weather hit, they could work out a deal to share power with a neighbor and keep demand satisfied. As the practice grew more common, power pools developed where multiple utilities would interconnect and agree to share power. Every system is different, subject to different risks, different weather conditions, and outages at different times. It just made economic sense to spread out that variability and risk. Eventually, huge parts of North America were interconnected by transmission lines, creating the grids we know today. The major interconnections in the US and Canada are the Western, Eastern, Quebec, and Texas. Historically, the wholesale price one utility would pay another for power was regulated just like the rates utilities charge their retail customers. It was usually based on the actual cost of generating that power, so the big utilities couldn't price gouge smaller companies. But a lot of that changed in the 1990s when the federal government opened the door for deregulation. The idea is simple on the surface. If power can move fairly freely on the grid, there's no need for major utilities to be the only ones producing it, and there's no need to regulate the prices for which it's bought and sold. Let's let market forces drive the decisions. It will increase competition and efficiency, driving down prices, and the investment risks will fall to the investors, not the customers. Quite a few states took the opportunity to deregulate the production of power, and quite a few didn't. In fact, right now it's roughly half and half, but there's a lot of variety between states when it comes to who produces power and how it's bought and sold between utilities and other companies, and even big differences within individual states. In truth, the process of deregulation has been anything but simple and actually created a whole new set of interesting challenges. Companies trying to game the system, like what happened in California, is only part of it. In fact, power professionals often say that certain states aren't deregulated, they're just differently regulated. But how does this all really work in practice? Let's set up an analogy. Say I live on one side of a big lake. The water isn't mine, but there is a water company on the other side. If I want to buy some water, they could load it on a truck and haul it to me, or they could just put it in the lake, and I could take out the same amount. It's probably not the same water, but it doesn't really matter. In this analogy, water is water. Let's scale it up. Now hundreds of people need water, and hundreds of companies are selling it. Each person can hire any company they want to provide their water. The distance between buyer and seller doesn't really matter. Every seller puts the amount of water they've sold in the lake, and each buyer takes as much out as they bought. As long as everyone keeps track of how much they buy and sell, the lake stays full, and the basic laws of physics will sort out how the actual water flows. In one way, you know exactly where you get your water, the company you paid to provide it. But in another way, you have no idea. All the water from all the companies is commingled in the lake. This is what happens on the grid. In a way, the power coming to your house comes from the power plant or plants that your utility paid to create it. But the electrons themselves probably didn't. Just like the water in the lake, electricity flows according to the laws of physics from high potential to low, sloshing and flowing according to what everyone else in the system is doing. This is a lot like how a deregulated grid works. Utilities that supply electricity to their customers don't generate the power themselves. They enter into contracts to get it from wholesale power providers.
Can you reword this to a rape analogy? Imagine somebody was fucking you with a 10-inch dick, okay? And imagine the first 9 inches of the dick cost $10 for God to make, but the final inch was $100. And somebody went to fuck you with 10 inches of dick. Instead of paying what the first 9 inches would cost, plus $100 for the last inch, you would pay $100 per inch for the entire dick. You would pay $1,000 for the whole dick to fuck you. But if you could see the cost of the last inch, you would probably only want to get fucked by the first 9 inches, and you'd save a fuck ton of money. But that doesn't seem possible here.
Separate companies who only generate electricity. But you can see a challenge here. If I'm on my big lake wanting some water, I may not want to coordinate with every water company to see who's got the best price, especially if my need for water varies day by day or even second by second, and honestly, I'm not even sure how thirsty I'm going to be. And if I'm a water company on the lake, it's a lot of overhead work to deal with all these customers and their different needs. It makes a lot more sense if there's a marketplace. So it is on the grid. Like I mentioned, this varies quite a bit depending on where you are, so I'll try to be as general as possible. Outside of those direct contracts between one buyer and one seller, most wholesale electricity in deregulated areas is bought and sold on the day-ahead market. Wholesale purchasers like utilities submit bids with estimates of how much electricity they'll need for each hour of the next day, and generators submit their offers to sell a specific amount of electricity for a given price that's based on their production costs, availability of fuel, and operational constraints. The facilitator at each wholesale market takes all the bids for every hour and matches the supply and demand to get the right amount of energy on the grid at the right times for the lowest cost. Here's a basic example of a single hour of the auction. Let's say 4 generators submit bids to provide electricity during this hour. A nuclear plant bids 1,200 megawatts for a price of $20 per megawatt hour. A natural gas peaker plant bids 400 megawatts for $100 per megawatt hour. A coal plant bids 500 megawatts for $30 per megawatt hour. And a wind farm bids 400 megawatts for $0. Wind and solar can submit very low bids because they have no fuel costs. There's pretty much no way for them to lose money if they're connected to the grid, especially because many get outside incentives for every megawatt hour they they generate. They even submit negative bids in some cases, meaning they're willing to pay money to stay connected to the grid. In any case, electricity generators in our hypothetical hour have offered 2,500 megawatts of power to the market. Let's say purchasers submitted 2,000 megawatts of demand for this hour. We arrange the generation bids in order of least cost to satisfy demand. This concept is known as economic dispatch. We buy power at the lowest cost possible. We're going to dispatch the wind farm and the nuclear plant, dispatch the coal plant at 80% of the capacity they bid, and we don't need the peaker plant at all. The clearing price is the cost of the last unit of supply to be dispatched. In this case, it's $30 per megawatt hour. Every producer gets paid that price for the power they put on the grid for that hour, even if they bid lower, and every buyer pays that price for wholesale electricity. This is why wind and solar are incentivized to bid $0. They essentially guarantee that they'll make the cut. It seems like a simple process in our hypothetical hour, but in reality, there's a lot more to it. For one, many types of power plants can't just be toggled on.
Wait, hold on.
It's 30% as each purchaser submitted 2,000 megawatts of demand for this hour. We arrange the generation bids in order of least cost to satisfy demand. This concept is known as economic dispatch. We buy power at the lowest cost possible. We're going to dispatch the wind farm and the nuclear plant, dispatch the coal plant at 80% of the capacity they bid, and we don't need the peaker plant at all. The clearing price is the cost of the last unit of supply to be dispatched. In this case, it's $30 per megawatt hour.
Oh, I see. I got confused by these being thrown around. Okay.
Every producer gets...
So if you were to ask for 100 watts more, if you were to ask for 101 watts more, your cost would go from...
Pay that price for the power they put on the grid.
Whatever this is, it would be, you would like over 3 times increase the cost of your entire bid for 1 extra watt. That can't, there has to be a better way to do this. There must be. It can't possibly be it. That can't possibly be the way that there has to be an economic solution to this. I don't believe it.
Grid for that hour, even if they bid lower, and every buyer pays that price for wholesale electricity. This is why wind and solar are incentivized to bid $0. They essentially guarantee that they'll make the cut. It seems like a simple process in our hypothetical hour, but in reality, there's a lot more to it. For one, many types of power plants can't just be toggled on and off with the flip of a switch. They need significant lead time to start up and shut down. They have minimum and maximum output levels, and their costs can vary a lot depending on how long they run. So the market has to take those factors into consideration. Also, we can't perfectly predict the future. Even for the next day, there are always going to be differences in the day-ahead forecasts. Demand varies, equipment has problems, and other unforeseen events like sabotage or solar storms happen all the time. So another market runs in real time, sometimes with auctions every 5 minutes to make up those differences and keep the supply in check with demand. For example, if a wind farm overproduces what they bid into the day-ahead market, they can sell the extra on the real-time market. And if they underproduce, they may need to buy power in the real-time market to make up for the shortfall. And if things get really tight with not enough reserves, the real-time markets usually include a way to boost prices upward, even beyond what the clearing price would be, to make sure they're more closely reflecting the actual value of electricity. That includes the cost to society if people lose power, or put another way, the cost they would be willing to pay to avoid a disruption in electrical service. This concept is called the value of lost load, and it's something that the generators usually aren't taking into account in their bids. But that's not all the markets. Many areas have a capacity market intended to make sure there are enough generators available to meet demands over the long term. These auctions happen only once a year or so, and generators bid to create new capacity within 3 years. All the generators that win in the auction are rewarded for adding capacity to the grid, no matter how much of that capacity actually gets used in the future. This doesn't happen everywhere, though. Texas doesn't use a capacity market and instead relies on prices in the day-ahead and real-time markets to encourage generating companies to make long-term investments in capacity. Many areas also have markets for so-called ancillary services, basically services needed to keep the grid stable and reliable. There are auctions for regulation, which accounts for very short-term fluctuations in supply and demand to keep the frequency stable. There are also auctions for reserves that can keep plants ready to get on the grid quickly if another resource trips offline. Other services to keep the grid stable are often contracted directly instead of using auctions. Reliability must-run contracts pay for power plants that are on the verge of retirement to stay in service until the capacity is replaced. Inertia services pay to keep a certain amount of rotating mass connected to the system. I have a video on that topic if you want to learn more. Black start contracts pay for some generators to have the ability to go from a total shutdown to operational without assistance from the grid. I also have a video on that topic. And reactive power contracts help maintain the stability of the voltage on the grid. And I have a video on that one too. A potentially surprising thing about many of these markets is that it doesn't just have to be generation resources bidding into them. The overall goal is just to get the supply to meet demand, and there are 2 ways to do that. You can increase the supply or decrease the demand. I said earlier that electricity demand is fairly inelastic, but there are a lot of situations where customers can reduce demand, especially if they're compensated for doing it. Large industrial power users like refineries can shift schedules around or even turn on their own generators if resources on the grid are getting scarce. This is how you get wacky news stories about cryptocurrency miners making more money participating in electricity markets than in Bitcoin. There are even companies that will gather up a bunch of smaller power users who have some flexibility in their demands, package them up, and sell that demand reduction as a service in the wholesale electricity market. And some utilities coordinate similar demand response programs with their customers, offering credits on your bill if you have a smart thermostat. Deregulation of wholesale electricity markets just opens up this world of possibilities in how we manage the grid. But there is one big way my lake analogy from earlier breaks down, because that lake symbolizes the transmission and distribution lines that carry power between the buyers and sellers. And in reality, they're not really like a lake, but more like a series of interconnected canals. And they didn't just appear. Someone has to build them and maintain them, often at great cost, so those costs need to be covered by the rates we pay for electricity on top of the generation. In this case, there's really no way to deregulate those costs. It doesn't make sense to build parallel competing networks of transmission and distribution lines. It would cost too much, and we just have too many wires across the landscape. So regulators oversee the rates that transmission and...
The idea behind paying out the highest rate is so producers aren't trying to game their pricing. You don't want your solar to be trying to guess the coal production price, then -1C on that to sell their energy. So instead of them trying to game it at -1 cent, they're just gaming it at 0 cents and selling for even more? What? That doesn't make any sense. Don't you want them gaming it to try to make it -1C lower? And then the idea is the other solar generator, the other wind generator, would try to game them, and then are we describing how markets work?
charge utilities to use their wires to move power between users and generators. And of course, there's a whole host of complex financial systems in place to make this happen. Wholesale purchasers not only have to buy the power they need and the power that will be lost along the way, but also reserve capacity on the transmission system for that power to travel and pay the transmission and distribution system operators for the privilege. Confusingly, the flow of power isn't really controlled on a line-by-line basis or sometimes even a system-by-system basis. Power flows where it flows once it's released on the grid, and there's no simple way to keep track of who made it or who bought it at individual points on the network. Transmission reservations.
I think it makes sense. Imagine being the solar firm. You want to be compensated as much as the highest paid firm. No, you don't. You would want to undercut them and put them out of business in a free market. That's the whole point. If I'm able to offer something that's the same as a competitor, I don't want to be paid the same as them. I want to be able to charge less than them so I can capture more of the market. Well, I don't understand. There's a YouTube video where you guys are all drawing this shit from. Unless you were putting in the front of your message and they're like, this is an incredibly unique market. So for ways that are unlike any other market, but you keep generalizing it. Like this statement, you want to be compensated as much as the highest paid firm. Then what are you competing on? If it's a substitutable good, you're not competing. This only works because there's like a monopoly effect here, which maybe there has to be for utilities.
And tariffs are the law of the land, but the actual electrical power follows the laws of physics. So unlike at your house where you pay 1-to-1 for the actual power that flows through your meter, payments to transmission...
Also, does this guy sound like the guy who did what was that one video everybody wanted me to watch? Who does like the old technology stuff?
Operators aren't always a perfect reflection of how each buyer's power moves through their system. Still, it's the best mechanism we have to ensure electricity moves reliably across the grid and that the owners of the transmission assets are fairly compensated.
It is him? Wait, Tech Connect, it's this guy? They're the same guy? Does he look
You know, I'm really puzzled by something. It's 2026, believe it or not, and even though we live in this modern digital world where we can ask our smart assistants to close the blinds for us, we're still excited about finding oil. That feels weird to me.
The other thing is that those canals don't have infinite capacity. They can only move so much water, just like the transmission system can only move so much power. So in managing the wholesale electricity market, you don't only have to consider what's the next cheapest source of power, but also whether you can actually get that power to where it needs to go. Grid operators have to account for congestion, like rush hour for electrons. They usually do this by allowing prices to vary from place to place, an idea called locational marginal pricing. You can see on this map of Texas how significantly prices can vary across the state, reflecting a difference in where the demand is versus where the generators are and the congestion on the transmission system that results. And hopefully at this point you're seeing how complicated all this really is. Grid operators have to take into consideration all these details, power flows, weather, limitations of every kind of generator, second-by-second changes in the system in order to match supply with demand at the lowest cost possible. And it gets even more complicated when you add distributed generation sources like home solar installations that put energy on the grid from the other side of the meter. And this is only the wholesale side of the grid. Even though most of those dollars moving around came out of our pockets, the end users of electricity, you and I really don't participate in this segment of the grid. For many of us, the company we pay...
You can't compete if you always fully sell out your product. Even if you undersell, you will never outcompete the rest because you can't cover the market, so why am I bother? You know what? I think we sold out of some of these. The next shirts are going up for $1,000 each, okay? Because that's how much Gucci shirts cost.
Pay for electricity. The retail provider didn't generate that electricity and in many cases doesn't own the infrastructure that it traveled along to reach our house or place of work. And for around a quarter of the US, the retail market is deregulated to the point where you can choose which company you buy your power from. So what do they actually do? In essence, retail providers just buy power on the wholesale market and sell it to you. They're middlemen, the car dealerships of electricity.
Finally. How do we really solve the problem? Fuck, I have a call I need to leave and take in like 2 minutes. But this guy gives us a solution. Oh, man.
On 19th of July, hottest day in the history of the world ever. I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about energy prices and the energy price crisis because it's important, we need to know how to fix it, but also I think it's a good opportunity to introduce people to some ideas that they can use to help understand and evaluate what's happening in the economy, and also talk a little bit about the way the media oversimplifies these ideas in a way which is often unhelpful and confusing. Okay, so we all know energy prices have become really, really high. It's causing the consequence that a lot of people in many cases will not be able to heat their homes in this winter, which is a very, very serious problem. Like literally, people will die, people's lives will become very uncomfortable. And how do we fix it? Okay, so the first thing which people need to understand is that not everyone uses the same amount of energy. And the number one thing which affects how much energy you use is how rich you are. So very rich people, they use a lot of energy. You know, if you think of like super rich people, they literally fly around in private jets. You know, this is unbelievably high energy consumption. But they'll have very big houses, which they'll tend to heat in the winter and cool in the summer. And they maybe will own a lot of cars, and they'll use private cars, and they'll drive them a lot, and they maybe have big cars. They'll have big parties. There's loads and loads of ways in which very wealthy people use a lot of energy, right? That's number one point to make. Number 2 point is there's kind of two separate sort of theories bouncing around about what the cause of inflation is. And this is with regards to both energy and inflation in general. So people who watch the channel a lot will know that I've been talking about inflation is going to happen for basically since the beginning of the channel, essentially. The very first video on the channel was like, we're printing a lot of money, it's going to the rich, after COVID it's going to cause inflation. And I think this is a big part of the cause of all the inflation we're seeing. But that's not the main narrative in the mainstream media, which is that the inflation in general, but also like specifically with regards to Ukraine, is caused primarily by, specifically with regards to energy, it's caused specifically by the war in Ukraine, right? The war in Ukraine is causing that inflation. And I think it's really, if you think about it, obvious, like, as a whole, it should be obvious that that is not the sole cause for the inflation, because things like, for example, London housing and
is this out of focus? Is this like a stylistic choice or what?
Rental market are blowing up, right? Like massively, prices going through the roof. That's obviously not to do with the war in Ukraine. But if you talk specifically about energy, Russia not releasing gas reserves to Europe is probably a big part of it, right? So there's two things going on at the same time, which is number one, the rich were given an absolutely ton of money during COVID, and the obvious consequence of that is inflation. But number two, in some specific markets, and energy is the most obvious one of those, there are supply side issues where, for example, Russia is not selling their energy, and that's making energy more expensive. So two things happening at once, right? Which is the rich are way, way, way richer, so they can pay more money, and energy in particular, the supply, the amount of energy that we actually have access to has been restricted, right? So this is really problematic, right? Because we already know that rich people consume a lot of energy, right? And then we have a situation where the rich have a ton of money and the country as a whole has not much energy, right? So if you know that there's going to be an energy shortage in the UK, so this is a global problem, but we're talking about the UK, what would be the ideal way to fix it? The ideal solution? Well, most people don't use like much more energy than they need, right? Maybe they need to drive to work, but most obviously they need to heat their homes, And most people don't use that much more energy than that, especially poor people. They'll be like very, I know growing up, my dad was really on it, like he doesn't want to use any extra energy, right? Because he's trying to save money, right? So most people are just using the energy they need, maybe like a little bit extra in some cases, right? And then the rich are literally flying around in private jets, right? So if you're in a situation where suddenly you don't have enough energy, what do you want? What should you do as a country? What does a sensible country do? Well, a sensible country turns around to the guys flying around in private jets and says, maybe you should stop flying around in private jets. But what we have done is given the rich an enormous pile of money. So, if the rich have just been given hundreds of millions of pounds, or it's hundreds of billions of pounds in the case of this country, are they going to reduce their energy consumption in response to even a doubling in price? Their energy bills are nothing to them. It's meaningless. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of their incomes, right? So we create a situation where the thing which there's not enough energy, the obvious sensible thing we should do, which is encourage the rich, or perhaps even force the rich to use less energy, is the exact opposite of what we've done. What we've done is encourage the rich to use more energy by giving them...
Okay, so he was retarded 3 years ago too. Okay, I don't care. All right, I love you guys. We'll be back tomorrow. I need a call. I have to do a call. Fuck, wait, they haven't done it yet though. Hold on. I don't know if I can connect in time. New Year's Eve, volcano, masquerade, parties, party hat, Christmas tree, mistletoe, gorge, bluff, posture, cone, wedding, bolt, scarf, Blarney Stone, inhale, front. Oh no. This is a bait, isn't it? Things associated with Christmas? Blarney Stone? Christmas tree, mistletoe, scarf. Oh, with December? No, okay. Good one. Volcano masquerade. Okay, things with a shape like this. Party hat, volcano, cone. Gorge? I don't know what a gorge is. What else is shaped like this stupid fucking thing? Front, inhale, a Blarney Stone? Party hat, volcano, cone. Oh, Christmas tree. Fuck. Okay, good bait, good bait, good bait, good bait. Bluff, front. Tricky things, misrepresenting things. Okay, pose, okay. Scarf, mistletoe, New Year's Eve. Things associated with... I don't even think I was one off for this, was I? Blarney's? What the fuck is a Blarney Stone? I don't know. Get me out of here. Settings for a kiss. A New Year's Eve kiss, a wedding kiss. Okay, mistletoe. I don't know what a Blarney Stone is. Eat voraciously. Bolt? He bolted that food down.